Anyone from England? Yeah, you didn't put your hand up earlier, did you? What's the matter with Europe? Anyone from Australia or New Zealand? Let's have a look. Oh, crikey, there's loads of you. Oh, not so. Usually we get loads of hands. Actually, we have a saying in the Tower of London. If you ever meet a happy English person in London, generally they're from Australia or New Zealand. You don't find happy English Londoners. Oh, by the way, anyone from America? You're not from America here. Oh, crikey, loads of people here. And Canada as well. We like the Canadians. You're still members of the Commonwealth. Oh, there we go. Still members of the British Empire as it is. I'm trying to think, who have I left in one off? Oh, the rest of the countries don't really matter, do they? Where are you from? You're not part of the British Empire or Americans, we don't like you. Go away. I'm only joking. Wherever you're from in the world, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope you have a lovely visit to England. And if you're from England, why haven't you been here before? Anyway, we've made our way through the Byward Tower. We are now standing in the outer ward or outer Bailey of the Tower of London, the area between the inner and outer defensive walls. The road running, go away aeroplane. Do you know what, I did a tour the other day and somebody on the front row, airplane went over, she said, why did they build the Tower of London under the flight plan at Heathrow Airport? I don't know. And I'm wearing this funny uniform. I was on the West Gate about 2 weeks ago. This lady came, she goes, excuse me, do you work here? And I went, that was the classic I had a couple of weeks ago. Oh, I'll come back to that one. Now, ladies and gentlemen, so we are standing now in the outer ward or outer Bailey of the Tower of London, the area there between the inner and outer defensive walls. The road running between the two here is known as Mint Street. Now, it's called Mint Street because this is where all the coins of the realm were designed and minted up until the year 1810. And they've got an exhibition there, number 2 Mint Street, about the time when the Royal Mint was here at the Tower of London. The windows upstairs, incidentally, that used to light up, that lights up the accommodation, which used to, I'll start again, shall I? I was the first one that could sober up. This is not going to get any better, by the way. The windows up there, ladies and gentlemen, that used to be the accommodation for Sir Isaac Newton when he was here at the Tower of London as Master of the Mint. Now, he must have had a bit of time on his hands, because while he was here, he invented gravity, ladies and gentlemen. Another great British invention. That's when the British used to make things, still used to this day. Now, the outside walls here, ladies and gentlemen, when you become a young warder or beefeater here at the Tower, we also have to live here. We're given accommodation for the job, and accommodation for the young warders is here in the outside walls of the Tower of London. In fact, the word casemate, you can see over there, the casemates, is a Latin term for a dwelling in an outer wall. We have to live here as part of the job, but they do charge us rent! It's less than £100 a month. It's just the principle of the thing irritates me. And the jacuzzi in my house, I can barely get 8 people in there. Terrible. But also, some of my colleagues live in some of the towers as well. For instance, to my right, the Beauchamp Tower. One of my colleagues lives in there. It's got a very funny shaped living room. Now, all of the towers here at the Tower of London were used at some stage to house prisoners. Famous prisoners kept in the Beauchamp Tower, Guildford, Dudley, Robert Dudley were kept in that tower as prisoners in around 1554. Guildford Dudley made his way from that tower and up to Tower Hill in 1554 to have his head removed from his body. Now, Robert Dudley used to walk the battlements here, and he met a young Princess Elizabeth. She'd been imprisoned in the Tower of London by her half-sister, Queen Mary. They formed a close relationship, although they never married. And these walls here are still referred to as Queen Elizabeth's Walk. Unfortunately, it's closed to the public. Now, moving down the outside walls, we come to this tower here, the Byward Tower. Famous prisoners kept in the Byward Tower. Lords Kilmarn and Cambalmarino were kept in there after the failed Second Jacobite Rebellion of 1745, led by Bonnie Prince Charlie. They made the way from that tower and up to Tower Hill in 1746 to lose their heads to block and axe. Their good friend Simon Fraser also bought to the tower after the Jacobite Rebellion. He made his way from the Tower of London up to Tower Hill in 1747. He, ladies and gentlemen, the last man beheaded in England as a form of execution. We continue to execute people, we just hung them instead. Last execution in the tower, last Thursday, shoplifter. We're very strict in the Tower. No, I'm joking. Their last execution in the tower was in the Second World War. Joseph Jacobs, Jerpen spy. Now, from the Byward Tower to the left, you can see the Byward Postern or Sally Port, the archway in the wall. It's also known as the Royal Entrance. Now, in the days when London had little more than rough and even tracks, royalty would travel by the River Thames. They'd moor their royal barge to the side of that wall, cross over a small drawbridge, make their entrance into town via that archway. Now, on the 29th of May, 1533, Henry VIII stood there, awaiting the arrival of his second wife, Anne Boleyn. She was coming to the Tower in preparation for her coronation on the 1st of June. As Anne steps into the archway, Henry VIII very publicly steps forward, embraces his new wife, then apparently promises to love her for the rest of her life. Easy for him to say, I think, isn't it? Now, ladies and gentlemen, he does love her quite well for the next 3 years, as 3 years later, poor old Henry VIII was sadly widowed. When Anne returned to the Tower via a very different gateway, and obviously very different reasons. You'd feel quite sorry for Henry VIII if it didn't happen quite so often, wouldn't you? Anyway, moving round behind me now, we can see this tower here. It's called the Bell Tower. The Bell Tower was built during the reign of Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, around 1190. Now, it's called the Bell Tower because on top there is a belfry. Within that belfry, the oldest surviving curfew bell in the City of London. The bell dates from around 1651. The bell itself would generally be rung as a warning. When it was rung, gates would be closed, defences manned. But it was also rung 1 hour before every execution. Now, the Bell Tower, ladies and gentlemen, is the oldest and strongest surviving of the 13 towers that make up this area here, the inner defensive wall. It comprises of 2 chambers, one on top of the other, but both used at one stage to house many famous prisoners. The upper chamber, incidentally, was apparently refurbished in 1939 because that's where we planned to put Adolf Hitler if we ever caught him. There we go. Poor old Adolf never had a tour of the tower. That's probably why he was so very, very angry. Actually, I always say to people, they can't be that confident in his incarceration because the toilet up there, still to this day referred to as Adolf Hitler's toilet, was never actually plumbed into anything. So, anyway, but prisoners held in the Bell Tower. In the lower chamber, Sir Thomas More, the Lord Chancellor. At the same time, in the upper chamber, a man called John Fisher. He was the Bishop of Rochester. Both men incarcerated here at the Tower of London by Henry VIII. For if you should recognise, Henry as head of the Church of England. Both men made their way from this tower and up to Tower Hill in 1535, one in June and one in July, to have their heads removed from their bodies. Both of these men now lie at rest within the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, while their heads lie at rest elsewhere. Both men incidentally canonised as saints in 1935 by the Roman Catholic Church. Also kept in the Bell Tower in the upper chamber is a man called James Scott. He was the Duke of Monmouth. Now, James, ladies and gentlemen, was the eldest of 12 to 15 illegitimate children fathered by Charles II. The reason I stumble there is because Charles II would only ever admit to 12 illegitimate children, as if the others would make a difference, I suppose. Anyway, now when Charles II dies in 1685, he unfortunately leaves no heir to the British throne. He had lots of children, but none with his wife. So the throne of England, you know what men are like, they've got to-do lists, they just don't get round to it, you know. Paint the kitchen ceiling, I'll do that. Have sex with your wife, do that Tuesday. So the throne of England passes to his younger brother, James the Duke of York, who was then crowned James II. Now, James II was a very pious man, but unfortunately he was a Catholic. We didn't like Catholics very much in this country at that time, so James Scott, the eldest of these illegitimate children, raised an army from popular Protestant support in what became known as the Pitchfork or Monmouth Rebellion. Unfortunately, it all ends very badly for him at the Battle of Sedgemoor in Somerset. His army thoroughly defeated. Now, he was sentenced to death in his absence, so when he was eventually captured, all he had to do was come here to the tower. He then spent 3 days and 2 nights in the upper part of this tower before he made his way up to Tower Hill. Incidentally, his executioner that day was a man called Jack Ketch. Jack, a very famous executioner of the 17th century, well, actually not so much famous as infamous, in the fact that Jack generally botched executions up because when he beheaded people, he was generally very, very drunk. There's nothing wrong with that. Oh, unfortunately, Monmouth was to be no exception to his rule of terror, for after between 5 and 7 blows of the axe from Jack, Monmouth's head was still attached to his body, although it's worth saying not quite as firm as it had been when Jack had started. At this stage, much under the derision of the crowd, Jack throws down the axe and produces his butcher's knife. By trade, Jack was a full-time butcher. And yes, it does get worse, for Jack then continued to cut Monmouth's head off by hand. Now, you'd think that'd be the end of the story. You're right, ladies and gentlemen. I did one of these the other day, and a woman quickly rushed forward to say, put their hands over the ears of her young son to save him from the terrible tale of James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, at which point he looked at her and said, Mum, it was on Horrible Histories last night. So now when you're updating your Facebook profile and cooking them dinner, they're watching some horrible stuff on kids' television. Now, ladies and gentlemen, so at this stage, the head was now detached from the body. At this stage, though, Monmouth's family came forward. They'd like a painting of him. After all, he was the son of a King of England, albeit illegitimately. So their head and the body were returned to the Tower of London, where their head was sewn back onto the body by the Tower surgeon. Oh. Yes, it was too late to save him, I might add. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the painting was then made of Monmouth, which was said to have a good likeness of him, although slightly pale. Monmouth now, ladies and gentlemen, has the very dubious distinction of being one of the few people buried within the chapel ryle of St Peter ad Vincula with his head attached, albeit detached several hours prior to that. Isn't that a rather grisly story? So, ladies and gentlemen, do you still want a tour of the Tower of London? Yeah! Excellent. Let's be heading down to Traitors'